Everyone for showing up. We're getting to the tail end of a long day. And as Jack said, we have Congressman Rick Crawford, the chair of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. There's a lot going on these days, yes, so we'll kind of jump right into it. I understand this is your first on-stage event, we think, in the new role, right?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
So thank you for joining us. Sure. We can kick off real quick with the news of the day here, right? The potential Air Force One from Qatar. We had Senator Schmidt earlier say no big deal. We had Representative Hines earlier saying it's a counterintelligence nightmare. Mm-hmm. Where do you fall in that spectrum of if this plane is delivered, is it an issue?
I think you just touched on it right there. If this plane is delivered, it's not happened yet. Could it be a counterintelligence problem? It could be. I think that problem exists in a lot of different capacities, but certainly if you were going to put it into the inventory, you would, clear it, and you could address that. So I think people are probably making more of it than is necessary at this point, and so we'll wait and see what happens if they actually are going to accept that gift and put it into the fleet, and what the disposition would be at that point. So I'll reserve further judgment until that happens.
Have you heard anything from the White House or DOD or anything about the plan?
Mm-mm.
We're not there yet?
No.
Great. Another issue of the day, you put out a statement last night about DNI, Tulsi Gabbard's firing of two top officials after the report on Venezuela came out. You said that you're against, obviously, the politicization of intelligence. Did you see any evidence of that these folks that were fired? I mean, do you have a sense of what happened there?
Yeah, so I think this has sort of been systemic in the IC for quite some time, and that is a sort of a inherent bias that exists in analysis. We can't have that. I can point to a couple of different ICAs, one regarding AHIs, for example, anomalous health incidents, another involving COVID-19. I mean, those were a couple examples. We've seen problems with, for example, the FBI baseball shooting investigation from June of 2017 that points to a problem with analytic integrity. And so, look, our leaders need to make sure that they're getting the accurate information, untainted with any kind of political bias one way or the other. So it's not about being bipartisan. It's about being nonpartisan. It's about presenting ground truth in its actual form and not injecting any kind of. This is a hard thing for human beings to do. I mean, we're hardwired to opine even when maybe we shouldn't be opining. But that's what we're asking analysts to do: is don't give me your opinion, give me the facts, because those facts inform decision makers. Those decision makers may be, tactical operators on the battlefield. They may be, strategic. They might even be in the White House, but without good, accurate information, it affects the decision-making process. And so what we want to see happen is, look, the American people need to know that they can trust our intelligence community and our federal law enforcement. And so I think it's imperative that we impart that cultural change that is devoid of any kind of political or agenda-driven or narrative-seeking type of an approach, but just give us the ground truth and allow those decision makers to make the decisions based on that information.
And have you seen evidence that, especially with those folks fired earlier this week, that they were politicizing intelligence?
Yeah, I think what you can see is, and Director Gabbard didn't make this decision in a vacuum. There's, as I said, I could point to 2 or 3 different ICAs where this was problematic that they were involved in, and this is an important step to tell the IC that this is going to be a sea change, and we're now culturally realigning to affect analytic integrity in the most positive way we can. And so it's actually the opposite of politicizing. It's trying to take the politics out of it completely.
And do you have a sense of who's coming in to replace them? And are you planning on holding a hearing on this? And
we haven't had that conversation yet.
Okay.
But I mean, I think she's making this decision. I don't think this was made out of hand, willy-nilly. I think that this was an informed decision based on a body of work over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. And this comes after, like as we said, the report about gangs from Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
sticking with the Western Hemisphere, which is a major area of interest for the Trump administration. As far as intelligence goes, we've been focused on the Middle East forever, right? Indo-Pacific, places like that, Ukraine. As much as you can share about where you worried about gaps in intelligence in the Western Hemisphere, Central South America.
Well, I think first off, we have to recognize that during the global war on terror, we did a fairly significant amount of repositioning assets to support the global war on terror, which left our neighborhood unguarded. And so we are in the process now of sort of reposturing, recognizing the threat that exists in our hemisphere. And when I say the threat that exists in our hemisphere, you know, historically, you think about the Cold War years, yes, we had Russia playing around in places like Nicaragua, Cuba, Mexico, other places where they could find favorable regimes and position themselves to be, to problematic for us in our own hemisphere. China is doing much more than that. Russia is still present, but China is doing much more than that. And so our lack of attention to our own neighborhood has created a problem there, and China has carved out a niche in most every country in our hemisphere. And so the problem that we have is when I travel the hemisphere, and I've been to many countries, talked with many heads of state and liaison partners and things of this nature, and they'll all tell me the same thing: you are our preferred partner. And then they'll turn around in a day or two, sign a deal with China, whether it's the BRI or a trade agreement or anything like that, or an infrastructure project or something along those lines. And the answer to that is we're not giving them options. So not only have we left our neighborhood unguarded, which we are reposturing now, but we have not done a good job offering alternatives to these countries. And so where they need help, they're going where they think they can get help. Mm-hmm. That's on us. That's something we have to change.
And how does, there's moves at state to close some consulate offices and embassies, different areas of the world. I know it's still a plan in progress. Is there any worry that if this happens in Central South America, we close some offices, close some diplomatic outreach efforts, that it could affect our ability to reach out to local governments, to collect intelligence, to really understand the ground truth of what's happening there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we have to do is recognize that we have to be very broad scoped in our assessment of what's taking place around the world. We can't take our eye off our neighborhood to reposition. I mean, obviously we've got things going on in Ukraine, we've got things going on in Israel, we've got things going on in the Indo-PACOM and other parts of the world. But it's absolutely imperative that we broaden our view and make sure that we're not taking our eye off of this is our neighborhood.
Yeah,
this is important. These are important partners for us. We have important allies in the region that we need to make sure that we're shoring up this relationships and taking a longer view, because that's what China does. They have a very long-term view, and I think we need to recognize that, and I think we are, and I think that's what the president has recognized, is it's really, really important for us to secure our hemisphere.
And the cartels in Mexico, what kind of visibility do we have there? I mean, there's always been some collection on these mm-hmm. cartels. I know we're flying some surveillance flights near the border, some drones over Mexico with the Mexican government's permission. How good do you think our visibility is in the operations of these cartels?
Mm-hmm. Well, I couldn't comment on that, but what I will say is obviously we recognize this is a huge problem. Anytime you turn on the news, you know that this is a huge problem. It has been for quite some time, and so this administration, and I think correctly, identified the cartels as foreign terror organizations. They're responsible for trafficking not only narcotics, fentanyl, chief among them, but also human trafficking and the posture that they have along our southern border, their northern border, and the havoc that they wreak along that corridor. And so it's important that we don't lose focus on that effort. I think the administration has that as a primary concern, and we're taking the appropriate steps to address it.
The president being in the Middle East this week, obviously, they restarted talks with Iran on some of about their nuclear program. There's other countries have mentioned that they might be interested in starting nuclear programs. Mm-hmm. As an oversight body, how do you plan to look to study these talks with Iran, mm-hmm. where they are with enrichment, where they're getting materials from, and where they want to go, and how to conduct oversight over these talks and this broader issue of nuclear proliferation?
As talks emerge and as they officially engage in talks, I mean, that's something I'm sure that we'll be able to track and be able to understand what it is they're, where they feel like they are in various stages of these negotiations. But, you have to understand who you're dealing with, who you're talking to. And Iran is not just going to say, okay, that sounds good, and give up a program that they think is in their interest to maintain. They have a pretty strong commitment to it. I don't think it's necessarily going to be easy, but the president says Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons. The Secretary of State says Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons. My counterpart on the Senate side, Tom Cotton, has been very vocal on this as well as chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. I agree with that 100%. I don't think we should tolerate that. The steps that we need to take to achieve that are still relatively fluid. Obviously, we're engaging in negotiations. I don't think it hurts at all to engage in these bilateral talks directly with the Iranians because, as we've seen in the past, oftentimes things are lost in translation when we have intermediates that are involved in the process that we don't necessarily get our best deal.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily negotiating on behalf of the United States. They're negotiating broadly on behalf of whatever stakeholders they think they represent, but that may or may not be in the interest of the United States. In this case, a bilateral negotiation would clearly be undertaken as a reflect the best interest of the United States.
And then quickly, we're running out of time. I know this is very brief. I wish we had more time. There's talks in Turkey this week, obviously, between the United States, between Ukraine and Russia. Secretary Rubio's there. What's your sense of how serious the Russians are about engaging in these talks? I mean, Putin sent some pretty low-level officials there, right?
That's the $64,000 question.
Yeah.
And the Russians, going back to the Soviets, have been kind of a thorn in our side since World War II.
Yeah.
And it's always been something that, as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. And so far, I think the president's position has been something similar in that it doesn't hurt us to talk to them. But we also have to sort of be careful who we're dealing with here. As I said, with the Iranians, I mean, they have a history. The Russians have a long history, and so, okay, we can engage in bilateral talks there. We can play a role in hopefully de-escalating there and coming to a peaceful solution in Ukraine. But just being mindful of who you're dealing with.
Yeah. Congressman, I appreciate it. It was all too brief, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And stick around. Next, we have Sebastian Gorka, Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director of Counterterrorism, sitting down with White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns. So stick around for that.